Small-town gardener hits the jackpot, keeps wife in the dark. When divorce papers arrive, she uncovers the shocking truth. In the small town of Oak Ridge, Texas, Jack Thompson wiped the sweat from his brow as he knelt in the lush garden of his wealthy client. At 45, Jack's weathered hands told the story of a man who had spent his life working the earth. As he planted a row of vibrant flowers, he couldn't help but think about the barren patch of dirt he called a yard back home. "There you go, little ones," he murmured to the flowers. "Grow strong and beautiful for the folks who can afford you." As the sun dipped low in the sky, Jack gathered his tools and headed home. The contrast between the manicured lawns of his clients and the modest houses in his neighborhood always made his heart sink a little. Sarah Thompson was waiting for him on their small porch, her face etched with worry. Jack's stomach tightened. He knew that look all too well. "How did it go?" he asked, already dreading the answer. Sarah's eyes welled up with tears. "The doctor called. The treatment, it didn't work. Again." Jack pulled his wife into a tight embrace, feeling her body shake with sobs. They had been trying for a baby for years, each failed attempt chipping away at their hope and their savings. "We'll find a way, Sarah. We always do," Jack whispered, but his words felt hollow even to him. Inside their small house, bills were piled high on the kitchen table. Sarah picked one up, her hand trembling. "Jack, I don't know how we're going to pay for all this. The fertility treatments, the mortgage, we're drowning." Jack ran his hand through his thinning hair, the weight of their financial struggles pressing down on him. "I'll pick up extra shifts at the garden center. Maybe I can ask for a raise." "A raise?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Jack, we both know they can barely afford to keep you on as it is." The tension in the room was palpable. Years of financial stress and disappointment had taken their toll on their once happy marriage. Maybe it's time we stop trying," Sarah said quietly, her eyes fixed on the floor. Jack felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "What? No, Sarah, we can't give up. Not now." "Then what do you suggest?" Sarah's voice rose. "Another loan? Selling the house? Jack, we're running out of options." Their argument escalated, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. Harsh words were exchanged, each cutting deeper than they intended. Finally, Sarah stormed out of the room, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. He slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. How had they come to this? As the night grew darker, Jack's mind wandered to his childhood. He remembered his father, a man broken by poverty, always talking about the lottery as their ticket out. "One day, Jackie boy," he'd say, "we'll hit it big, and all our problems will disappear." Jack had always dismissed his father's dreams as foolish. But now, staring at the pile of bills and thinking of Sarah's tear-stained face, he felt a desperate urge taking hold. Before he could talk himself out of it, Jack grabbed his wallet and headed to the local convenience store. The neon lottery sign buzzed overhead as he approached the counter. "One ticket, please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As the clerk handed him the slip of paper, Jack felt a mix of shame and hope. He knew the odds were astronomical, but at this point, what did he have to lose? Back home, Sarah was already in bed, her back turned to his side. Jack quietly changed and slipped under the covers, the lottery ticket burning a hole in his wallet. Just before he drifted off to sleep, a memory flashed in his mind. His mother's tearful face as his father gambled away their savings. Jack pushed the thought away. This was different, he told himself. This was their last chance at happiness. Little did Jack know, that small piece of paper was about to change their lives forever, in ways he could never have imagined. The next morning, Jack woke up early, his heart racing as he remembered the lottery ticket. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah, and headed to the kitchen. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and checked the winning numbers. His eyes widened in disbelief. He checked again and again. It couldn't be, but it was. Jack had won. Not just a few thousand, but millions. For a moment, he felt a surge of joy. All their problems were solved. No more financial stress, no more struggling to pay for fertility treatments. They could have the family they'd always dreamed of. But as quickly as the joy came, it was replaced by a paralyzing fear. Memories he'd long suppressed came flooding back. Jack was 10 again, watching his father burst through the front door, waving a lottery ticket and shouting about their newfound wealth. At first, it seemed like a dream come true. New house, new car, new clothes. But then things changed. His father started drinking heavily, becoming a stranger to Jack and his mother. The money that was supposed to solve everything only created more problems. Jack remembered the nights filled with shouting, the sound of breaking glass, his mother's tears. He remembered feeling scared and confused, wondering why money hadn't made them happy like it was supposed to. The final memory hit him like a punch to the gut. Coming home from school to find police cars outside their house, his father, drunk and belligerent, being led away in handcuffs. And his mother. Jack shook his head, trying to clear the painful images. He couldn't let that happen to him and Sarah. He couldn't let money destroy their lives like it had destroyed his family. With a sudden resolve, Jack decided he would keep the win a secret. He would find a way to use the money without Sarah knowing, to slowly improve their lives without risking everything they had. Just as he was hiding the ticket in a kitchen drawer, he heard Sarah's footsteps. He quickly slammed the drawer shut. "Jack, what are you doing up so early?" Sarah asked, rubbing her eyes. I couldn't sleep, thought I'd make some coffee," Jack stammered, his heart pounding. Sarah looked at him oddly. "Are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," Jack said, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." Over the next few days, Jack's behavior became increasingly erratic. He was jumpy and distracted, often lost in thought. Sarah noticed the change, her concern growing with each passing day. "Jack, what's going on with you?" she asked one evening. "You've been acting strange ever since that night we argued about money." "It's nothing," Jack insisted. "Just stressed about work." But Sarah wasn't convinced. She watched Jack closely, noticing how he'd check his phone nervously, how he'd make hushed phone calls when he thought she wasn't around. Meanwhile, Jack was secretly meeting with financial advisors, trying to figure out how to invest the money without raising suspicion. He opened new bank accounts, made plans for anonymous donations to clear their debts. Every time he came close to telling Sarah the truth, the memories of his past stopped him. He couldn't risk losing her, couldn't risk becoming like his father. One night, as Jack tossed and turned in bed, Sarah woke up. "Jack, please talk to me," she pleaded. "Are you sick? Are you in some kind of trouble?" Jack turned to her, seeing the worry in her eyes. For a moment, he considered telling her everything, but fear held him back. "I'm fine, Sarah." "Really," he said, hating himself for the lie. "Go back to sleep." Sarah lay awake long after Jack had fallen asleep, her mind racing with possibilities. What was he hiding? Was he having an affair? Was he involved in something illegal? The next morning, as she was doing laundry, Sarah found a crumpled piece of paper in Jack's pocket. Her heart stopped as she unfolded it and saw a woman's name and phone number scrawled across it. Sarah stared at the paper, her world crumbling around her. What had happened to the man she married? And what was she going to do about it? Sarah's hands trembled as she held the paper with the mysterious phone number. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. There had to be a logical explanation, right? "Jack?" she called out, her voice shakier than she intended. "Can you come here for a second?" Jack appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "What's wrong?" Sarah held up the paper. "I found this in your pocket. Who's Lisa?" Jack's mind raced. Lisa was the financial advisor he'd been secretly meeting. He couldn't tell Sarah the truth, but he couldn't lie either. Or could he? She's a new client," Jack stammered, "for landscaping." Sarah's eyes narrowed. She knew Jack was lying, but she couldn't prove it. The tension between them was palpable. Before they could discuss it further, the doorbell rang. Grateful for the interruption, Jack went to answer it. Standing on their porch was a striking woman with long, blonde hair and a dazzling smile. "Hi there. I'm Betty, your new neighbor. I just moved in next door and thought I'd introduce myself." Jack felt a mix of relief and anxiety. At least this distraction might help him avoid Sarah's questions for now. Sarah joined them at the door, her eyes darting between Jack and Betty. She couldn't help but notice how Betty's gaze lingered on Jack a bit too long. "Nice to meet you, Betty," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood." Over the next few days, Sarah watched with growing unease as Betty seemed to pop up wherever Jack was. She'd catch them chatting in the front yard or see Betty asking Jack for help with home repairs. Meanwhile, Jack was becoming increasingly paranoid. He'd secretly started investing the lottery money, but each transaction filled him with dread. What if Sarah found out? What if he made a mistake and lost it all? One evening, as Jack was on the phone with his financial advisor, he didn't notice Sarah walking into the room. He quickly ended the call, but not before Sarah overheard him talking about a large sum of money. "Who was that?" Sarah asked, her suspicion evident. "Just work stuff," Jack lied, hating himself for it. Sarah didn't believe him, but she said nothing. She was tired of the lies, tired of feeling like a stranger in her own marriage. As the days passed, the distance between them grew. Jack became more withdrawn, spending hours working in the garage. Really, he was on his laptop, obsessively checking his secret investments. Sarah, feeling neglected and suspicious, found herself drawn to Betty. Despite her initial dislike, she found Betty easy to talk to. Maybe she could get some answers about Jack's strange behavior. One afternoon, Sarah saw Jack entering Betty's house. Her heart raced as she watched him through the window. When he emerged an hour later, looking flustered, Sarah felt her world crumbling. That night, as they lay in bed, miles apart, despite being inches from each other, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't live like this anymore. Something had to change. Little did she know, Betty had her own secrets. As she watched Jack leave her house that day, a sly smile played on her lips. She knew about the lottery win, and she had plans of her own. The next morning, as Jack left for work, Betty approached him. "Hey, Jack," she said, her voice low. "We need to talk. I know about the money." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. How did she know? What was she going to do? As he stood there, paralyzed with fear, he didn't notice Sarah watching from the window, her heart breaking at what she thought she was seeing. The web of secrets and lies was tightening around them all, threatening to destroy everything Jack had been trying to protect. The arrival of Dr. Anderson in Oak Ridge stirred up a whirlwind of emotions for Sarah. Tall, charming, and attentive, he seemed to be everything Jack wasn't these days. During her first appointment, Dr. Anderson listened intently as Sarah poured out her frustrations about failed fertility treatments and her strained marriage. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, leaning forward, "I believe I can help you. There's an experimental treatment that shows promise. It's risky, but it might be your last chance." Sarah's heart raced with hope. "How much does it cost?" Dr. Anderson named a figure that made Sarah's heart sink. There was no way they could afford it. Meanwhile, Jack was facing his own temptation. Betty had cornered him after her revelation about the lottery win. "I won't tell anyone," she purred, her hand on Jack's arm, "but I think we could help each other out." Jack pulled away, his mind reeling. "What do you want?" Betty's smile was predatory. "Oh, just a little financial assistance, nothing you can't afford now." As Jack struggled with Betty's blackmail, Sarah found herself drawn to Dr. Anderson's kindness. She began spending more time at the clinic, telling herself it was for consultations. One evening, Sarah saw Jack entering Betty's house again. This time, she couldn't contain her hurt and anger. She stormed over, ready to confront them. Inside, Jack was rejecting Betty's advances. "I love my wife," he said firmly. "I won't betray her." Just then, Sarah burst in. The scene before her, Jack and Betty standing close, Betty's hand on Jack's chest, confirmed her worst fears. "How could you?" Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah, it's not what you think," Jack pleaded, but Sarah was already running out the door. In her distress, Sarah found herself at Dr. Anderson's office. The doctor comforted her, and for a moment, Sarah felt seen and understood. "Sarah," Dr. Anderson said softly, "I think I'm falling for you." Shocked, Sarah pulled away. Despite her anger at Jack, she couldn't bring herself to cross that line. Back home, Jack was frantic. He knew he was losing Sarah, and the weight of his secrets was crushing him. As Sarah walked in, Jack made a decision. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you." But before he could confess, they were interrupted by a loud banging on the door. Jack opened it to find his brother Tom, disheveled and wild-eyed. "Jackie boy," Tom slurred, "I'm in trouble. I need your help." Sarah watched the interaction, her suspicion growing. What else was Jack hiding? As the night wore on, the web of lies and secrets tightened around them all. Jack, torn between his love for Sarah and his fear of the truth. Sarah, caught between her loyalty to Jack and her growing feelings for Dr. Anderson. And circling them all, Betty and Tom, each with their own agendas. The next morning, as Sarah prepared for another appointment with Dr. Anderson, she made a decision. She would take the risk and try the experimental treatment, no matter the cost. Little did she know, this decision would set in motion a series of events that would change their lives forever. As Sarah left the house, Jack watched her go, the lottery ticket burning a bay hole in his pocket. He knew he was losing her, but he didn't know how to fix it without risking everything. The stage was set for a confrontation that would tear their world apart. Tom's unexpected arrival threw Jack's carefully constructed world into chaos. His older brother, always the family troublemaker, now stood in their living room, reeking of alcohol and desperation. "Jackie, I'm in deep," Tom slurred, his bloodshot eyes darting around the room. "I owe some bad people a lot of money." Jack felt the weight of his secret lottery win pressing down on him. He knew he could easily solve Tom's problems now, but at what cost? "How much, Tom?" Jack asked, dreading the answer. When Tom named the figure, Jack's heart sank. It was a substantial amount, even with his newfound wealth. "I don't have that kind of money," Jack lied, feeling Sarah's suspicious gaze on him. Tom's demeanor suddenly changed. "Oh, but I think you do, little brother. Word on the street is you've come into some cash recently. A lot of cash." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. How did Tom know? Had Betty told him? Sarah, who had been silently watching the exchange, spoke up. "What is he talking about, Jack?" Trapped, Jack fumbled for an explanation. "It's nothing, Sarah. Tom's just drunk and talking nonsense." But Tom wasn't backing down. "Tell her, Jack. Tell her about the lottery ticket." The room fell silent. Sarah looked at Jack, hurt and confusion evident in her eyes. "Lottery ticket? Jack, what's going on?" Before Jack could respond, his phone rang. It was his investment broker, calling about an urgent decision needed on a high-risk, high-reward opportunity. With Tom's debt looming and Sarah's suspicions growing, Jack made a rash decision. "Do it," he told the broker. "Invest it all." As Jack ended the call, he turned to find Sarah gone and Tom passed out on the couch. The weight of his secrets felt heavier than ever. Meanwhile, Sarah had fled to the sanctuary of Dr. Anderson's office. The kind doctor listened as she poured out her frustrations and fears. "I don't know who Jack is anymore," Sarah confessed, tears in her eyes. "He's keeping secrets, lying to me. I think he might be having an affair." Dr. Anderson placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Sarah, you deserve better than this. Have you considered the treatment we discussed? It might give you the fresh start you need." Sarah nodded, making a decision. "Yes, I want to do it. I need something to hope for." As Sarah left the clinic, filled with a mix of hope and trepidation, she didn't notice Dr. Anderson watching her go, a complex emotion in his eyes. Back at home, Jack was dealing with the aftermath of Tom's visit. His brother, now sober and remorseful, was making promises he couldn't keep. "I'll pay you back, Jackie, I swear. Just help me this one last time," Tom pleaded. Against his better judgment, Jack agreed to help. He transferred a large sum from his secret account to Tom's, praying it would be enough to solve the problem. But as Tom left, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of his troubles. That night, as Jack and Sarah lay in bed, miles apart despite their physical proximity, the air was thick with unspoken words and growing resentment. Sarah, her mind on the upcoming treatment, couldn't bring herself to confront Jack about Tom's accusations. And Jack, terrified of losing everything, couldn't find the courage to confess the truth. As dawn broke, Sarah rose early, feeling nauseous. She dismissed it as anxiety about her first treatment session. But as she bent over the toilet, a sudden realization hit her. Could she be pregnant? Now of all times? The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Just when she had given up hope, just when her marriage was falling apart, life might be playing the cruelest joke of all. With trembling hands, Sarah reached for a pregnancy test she had stashed away months ago. As she waited for the results, her mind raced with the implications. If she was pregnant, what would that mean for her marriage, for the treatment she was about to start, for her growing feelings towards Dr. Anderson? The timer on her phone beeped, signaling it was time to check the test. Sarah took a deep breath and looked down at the stick in her hand. Her gasp echoed in the small bathroom. 2 pink lines stared back at her, clear as day. Sarah was pregnant. Sarah stared at the pregnancy test, her mind reeling. After years of trying, countless treatments, and heartbreaking disappointments, she was finally pregnant. And it had happened naturally, just when she'd all but given up hope. Her first instinct was to rush and tell Jack, but then the events of the past few weeks came flooding back. The secrets, the lies, the growing distance between them. Could she trust him with this news? Meanwhile, Jack was facing a crisis of his own. The high-risk investment he'd made to cover Tom's debt had collapsed spectacularly. In a matter of hours, he'd lost a significant portion of his lottery winnings. Panic set in as Jack realized the magnitude of his mistake. He'd risked everything on a gamble, and now he was paying the price. How could he explain this to Sarah if she ever found out about the money? As Sarah prepared for her first appointment with Dr. Anderson since discovering her pregnancy, she wrestled with her conscience. She knew she should cancel the fertility treatment, but a part of her was afraid to let go of this backup plan. What if something went wrong with the pregnancy? At the clinic, Dr. Anderson greeted Sarah with his usual warm smile. "Sarah, you seem different today. Is everything all right?" Sarah hesitated, then decided to confide in him. "I'm pregnant, Dr. Fayette Anderson. It happened naturally." The doctor's face showed genuine surprise and joy. "Sarah, that's wonderful news, but I sense you're not entirely happy about it." Sarah broke down, confessing her fears about her marriage and the baby. Dr. Anderson listened attentively, offering comfort and advice. "Sarah, you need to tell Jack," he said gently. "Whatever is going on between you, he deserves to know about this." As Sarah left the clinic, she felt a mix of relief and anxiety. She knew Dr. Anderson was right, but the thought of confronting Jack terrified her. Back at home, Jack was desperately trying to salvage what was left of his investment. He was so engrossed in his phone call that he didn't hear Betty enter the house. "Hello, Jack," Betty purred, making him jump. "Bad day?" Jack ended the call abruptly. "Betty, you can't just walk in here. What do you want?" Betty moved closer, her intentions clear. "I think you know what I want, Jack. You're in trouble, aren't you? I can help." For a moment, Jack was tempted. Betty was offering an easy way out of his financial mess, but then Sarah's face flashed in his mind. "No, Betty," he said firmly, stepping back. "I love my wife. I won't betray her, no matter what." Betty's seductive smile turned into a scowl. "You'll regret this, Jack. I know your secret, remember?" As Betty stormed out, Jack slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. How had everything gone so wrong? Sarah, returning home, saw Betty leaving their house. Her heart sank as she watched Jack through the window, looking defeated and lost. In that moment, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't tell Jack about the pregnancy. Not yet. She needed time to figure out what she really wanted. As night fell, Jack and Sarah moved around each other like strangers, the weight of their secrets keeping them apart. Sarah touched her stomach gently, wondering about the life growing inside her. Jack stared at his phone, watching his financial future crumble before his eyes. Neither of them knew that the next day would bring a revelation that would shatter their world completely. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either break them apart forever or forge a new beginning from the ashes of their secrets and lies. In the quiet of the night, as Jack and Sarah lay awake in their separate emotional worlds, life continued to grow, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. The morning dawned with an eerie calm, the quiet before the storm that was about to break over Jack and Sarah's lives. Sarah woke up feeling nauseous, a reminder of the secret growing inside her. Jack hadn't slept at all, his mind racing with financial worries and guilt. As Sarah made her way to the kitchen, she overheard Jack on the phone, his voice tense and panicked. "What do you mean it's all gone? There must be something left." Sarah's heart raced. What was Jack talking about? What had he lost? When Jack ended the call and turned around, he found Sarah standing there, her face a mix of confusion and anger. "Jack, we need to talk. Now." Jack knew this moment was coming, but he still wasn't prepared. "Sarah, I can explain." "Explain what, Jack? The lies? The secrets? Or maybe you can explain why I saw Betty leaving our house yesterday?" Sarah's voice was cold, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Jack felt his world crumbling around him. "Sarah, it's not what you think, Betty, she..." But Sarah cut him off. "I don't want to hear it, Jack. I can't do this anymore. I want a divorce." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Jack felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "Divorce? Sarah, please, let me explain." Suddenly, Sarah doubled over, a sharp pain shooting through her abdomen. "Sarah!" Jack rushed to her side, his face pale with worry. Through gritted teeth, Sarah managed to say, "I'm pregnant, Jack." Jack's world stopped. Pregnant? But how? When? Before Sarah could respond, they were interrupted by a loud banging on the door. Jack opened it to find Tom, drunk and belligerent. "Where's my money, little brother? You promised to help me." Sarah, still clutching her stomach, looked at Jack in shock. "Money? What money? Jack?" Tom laughed bitterly. "Oh, he didn't tell you? Your husband here won the lottery. Millions, sis, and he's been hiding it from you." The room fell silent. Sarah stared at Jack, her face a mask of betrayal and disbelief. "Is this true, Jack?" Jack, trapped and desperate, nodded slowly. "Yes, it's true. I won the lottery, but Sarah, I can explain." "Explain? Explain?" Sarah's voice rose hysterically. "You've been lying to me for weeks, Jack. We've been struggling. I've been worried sick about money, about our future, and all this time you had millions." As if on cue, Sarah spotted a stack of papers on the counter, investment documents Jack had forgotten to hide. She grabbed them, her eyes widening as she saw the figures. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's all true. The lottery, the investments. Jack, how could you?" Jack, tears streaming down his face, tried to approach her. "Sarah, please. I was afraid. I didn't want the money to change us, to ruin what we had. I was trying to protect us." But Sarah was beyond listening. The pain in her abdomen was getting worse, and the stress of the situation was overwhelming her. "I don't know you anymore, Jack. I don't think I ever did." Suddenly, Sarah collapsed, crying out in pain. Jack rushed to her, panic overtaking him. "Sarah, Tom, call an ambulance." As they waited for the ambulance, Jack held Sarah's hand, pleading with her to hold on. Sarah, through her pain, looked at Jack with a mix of anger and fear. "If anything happens to this baby because of your lies, Jack, I'll never forgive you." The sound of sirens filled the air as the ambulance approached. In that moment, as paramedics rushed in and Sarah was lifted onto a stretcher, Jack realized the true cost of his deception. He had tried to protect his family from the dangers of sudden wealth, but in doing so, he might have lost everything that truly mattered. As the ambulance doors closed, with Sarah inside and Jack left standing in the driveway, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The castle of cards he had built with his lies had finally come crashing down. The hospital waiting room was a blur of activity, but for Jack, time seemed to stand still. The harsh fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell only heightened his sense of panic. Sarah, his Sarah, was fighting for her life and the life of their unborn child behind those sterile doors. "Mr. Thompson?" A nurse approached him. "Your wife is in critical condition. The doctors are doing everything they can, but..." Jack's world narrowed to a pinpoint. "But what? What's happening?" "There are complications with the pregnancy. We need your consent for an emergency procedure. It might be the only way to save your wife, but we might lose the baby." The weight of the decision crashed down on Jack. How could he choose? How could he live with himself no matter what he decided? With trembling hands, he signed the consent form. As the nurse hurried away, Jack slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. This was all his fault. If he had just been honest from the beginning. Suddenly, Jack remembered the lottery money. He still had access to millions. Maybe it could help somehow. He approached the nurse's station frantically. "I have money," he blurted out. "Lots of money. Can we get specialists? The best doctors? Whatever it takes, please. Just save them both." The staff exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to this desperate man. Meanwhile, word had spread through Oak Ridge about Sarah's condition and Jack's lottery win. The hospital waiting room began to fill with townsfolk, some offering support, others whispering judgments. Jack paced the floor, oblivious to the growing crowd. His mind raced with regrets and what-ifs. If only he could turn back time. Hours passed like years. Finally, a tired-looking doctor emerged. "Mr. Thompson?" Jack rushed over, his heart in his throat. "Your wife is stable, but she's not out of danger yet. We've managed to stop the bleeding, but the next 24 hours will be critical. As for the baby..." Jack held his breath. "We've done everything we can, but it's too early to tell. We'll know more soon." As the doctor left, Jack felt his knees give way. A nurse helped him to a chair as he broke down, sobs racking his body. In that moment of raw vulnerability, Jack made a decision. He would come clean about everything. To Sarah, to the town, to everyone. With shaky hands, he pulled out his phone and called the local news station. It was time for the truth to come out. As cameras arrived at the hospital, Jack stood before them, his face etched with grief and determination. "I have a confession to make," he began. He poured out the whole story, the lottery win, his fears, the lies, everything. He begged for Sarah's forgiveness, promising to make things right if only she would pull through. The town watched in shock as Jack laid bare his soul. Some were angry, feeling betrayed. Others felt sympathy for a man who had made a terrible mistake out of love and fear. As Jack finished his confession, a commotion near the ER doors caught everyone's attention. Doctors and nurses were rushing in. Jack's heart stopped. Was it Sarah? Had something happened? He raced towards the doors, pushing past reporters and onlookers. Just as he reached them, they burst open. There, on a hospital bed, was Sarah. She was pale and weak, but her eyes were open, and they were fixed on Jack. In that moment, as their eyes met across the chaotic hospital corridor, everything else faded away. The lies, the money, the town's judgment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was that Sarah was alive. And in her eyes, beneath the pain and betrayal, Jack saw a glimmer of something else. A chance. A tiny, fragile chance at forgiveness. As the bed was wheeled past him, Sarah reached out a weak hand. Jack took it, clinging to it like a lifeline. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Sarah lay in bed, her face pale but her eyes alert. Jack sat beside her, his hand hovering near hers, afraid to touch her but unable to leave. "Sarah," Jack began, his voice cracking, "I'm so sorry for everything." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Jack, how could you? All those lies." Before Jack could respond, the doctor entered. Both held their breath, waiting for news about their baby. "Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Thompson," the doctor said solemnly, "I'm afraid I have difficult news." Sarah's grip on Jack's hand tightened involuntarily. The stress and complications were too much. "I'm sorry, but you've lost the baby." The words hit them like a physical blow. Sarah turned away, her body shaking with silent sobs. Jack stood there, stunned, feeling the weight of his actions more than ever. As the doctor left, the silence in the room was deafening. Jack wanted to comfort Sarah, but he knew he was the last person she wanted comfort from right now. "Sarah, don't," Sarah cut him off. "Just don't, Jack. I can't do this right now." Days passed. Sarah recovered physically, but emotionally, she was a shell of her former self. Jack tried to be there for her, but every attempt was met with cold silence. Meanwhile, the town was abuzz with gossip. Jack's public confession had spread like wildfire. Some sympathized with him, understanding his fear of how money could change things. Others condemned him for his deception. One afternoon, as Jack was getting coffee in the hospital cafeteria, he overheard two nurses talking. "Can you believe it? All that money, and he hid it from his own wife. I heard he was having an affair with that new neighbor, Betty." Jack wanted to defend himself, to explain, but he knew he had no right. He had brought this on himself. Back in Sarah's room, he found her sitting up, looking out the window. For the first time in days, she spoke to him without prompting. "I want a divorce, Jack." The words hung in the air, final and devastating. "Sarah, please," Jack pleaded. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I love you. We can work through this." Sarah turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "Work through this? Jack, you lied to me for weeks. You made financial decisions that affected both of us without my knowledge, and because of your lies, because of the stress they caused, we lost our baby." Jack felt each word like a knife to his heart. He knew she was right. "What about the money?" he asked quietly. "It's yours too, Sarah. I'll give you everything." Sarah laughed bitterly. "The money? Jack, I don't want your money. I don't want anything from you. I just want my life back, the life I had before all of this." As Sarah's words sank in, Jack realized the true cost of his actions. He had lost everything that mattered, his wife's trust, their baby, their future together. Just then, there was a commotion in the hallway. They could hear raised voices, one of which Jack recognized as Tom's. "I need to see my brother. He owes me." Jack rushed to the door, trying to stop Tom from entering, but it was too late. Tom burst in, his eyes wild. "Jackie boy, there you are. Where's my cut? You owe me for keeping your secret." Sarah watched the scene unfold, her expression hardening. This was the final straw. "Get out," she said, her voice cold. "Both of you, get out now." As security arrived to remove Tom, Jack took one last look at Sarah. In her eyes, he saw the death of their love, the end of everything they had built together. Jack left the room, feeling the weight of his mistakes crushing him. He had tried to protect his family from the dangers of sudden wealth, but in doing so, he had destroyed everything. As he walked out of the hospital into the harsh sunlight, Jack knew he had a long road ahead. A road of redemption, of trying to make things right. But first, he had to face the consequences of his actions. The price of redemption, he realized, was steep, but it was a price he had to pay. Weeks had passed since Sarah's release from the hospital. The town of Oak Ridge was still buzzing with gossip about Jack's lottery win and the subsequent fallout. Jack and Sarah were living separate lives now, their once happy home divided by an invisible wall of hurt and mistrust. Jack had moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Every morning he would wake up, the reality of his mistakes hitting him anew. He had lost everything that mattered, his wife, his unborn child, and the trust of his community. Determined to make amends, Jack threw himself into community service. He started a project to renovate the town's rundown community center, using a portion of his lottery winnings. At first, people were skeptical, viewing his efforts as a way to buy back their approval. But as the days turned into weeks, and Jack worked tirelessly alongside local volunteers, attitudes slowly began to shift. Sarah, meanwhile, had returned to teaching. Her students and fellow teachers rallied around her, offering support and comfort. But inside, she was still struggling. The loss of her baby and the betrayal of her husband had left deep scars. One day, while grocery shopping, Sarah ran into Dr. Anderson. The kind doctor inquired about her health and offered words of encouragement. "Sarah," he said gently, "have you considered grief counseling? It might help you process everything you've been through." Sarah nodded, realizing she couldn't keep bottling up her emotions. She started attending therapy sessions, slowly working through her pain and anger. As Sarah focused on healing, Jack continued his efforts to make things right. He anonymously paid off the medical bills of several townspeople, started a scholarship fund for local students, and even helped Betty find a job in a neighboring town, wanting to remove any lingering doubts about their relationship. Months passed. The community center project was nearing completion, and Jack had become a familiar sight around town, always ready to lend a hand or offer support to those in need. Slowly, the whispers and judgmental glances began to fade. One crisp autumn morning, Jack was working in the garden he had planted behind the community center. It was a project close to his heart, reminiscent of the days when gardening brought him peace. "It's looking good," a familiar voice said behind him. Jack turned to find Sarah standing there, her arms wrapped around herself against the cool breeze. It was the first time they had spoken outside of necessary interactions about the divorce proceedings. "Sarah," Jack breathed, hardly daring to believe she was there. Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. There was so much to say, yet words seemed inadequate. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I've been watching what you've been doing for the town. It's good, Jack." Jack nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "It's the least I can do. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but—" "No," Sarah interrupted. "It doesn't, but it's a start." They talked for a while, tentatively at first, then with growing ease. Sarah shared about her therapy sessions, how she was learning to cope with their loss. Jack listened, his heart aching for the pain he had caused her. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Sarah prepared to leave. But before she did, she turned to Jack one last time. "I'm not saying I forgive you, Jack. Not yet. But I think I'm starting to understand. And maybe someday we can find a way to be friends again." With that, she was gone, leaving Jack standing in the garden, a small spark of hope flickering in his chest for the first time in months. That night, as Jack lay in his lonely apartment, he realized that rebuilding trust was like tending a garden. It required patience, care, and consistent effort. There were no shortcuts, no quick fixes. But with time and dedication, even the most damaged relationship could potentially bloom again. As he drifted off to sleep, Jack made a silent promise to himself and to Sarah. He would continue to work, to prove himself, to be the man she had once loved and trusted. And maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt ready to face it. A year had passed since that day in the community center garden. Oak Ridge had transformed, not just physically with the renovated center and new public spaces, but in spirit. The town that had once been torn apart by scandal and gossip now stood united, a testament to the power of redemption and community. Jack had become a pillar of the community, his lottery winnings now a tool for good rather than a source of secrecy and shame. He had established a foundation to help families struggling with fertility issues and pregnancy loss, turning his personal tragedy into hope for others. Sarah, too, had found a new purpose. Her experiences had led her to start a support group for women dealing with pregnancy loss. She found healing in helping others navigate the pain she knew all too well. On a sunny Saturday morning, the town gathered for the grand opening of the Oak Ridge Hope Center, a project Jack and Sarah had unexpectedly collaborated on over the past few months. It was a place that combined their individual efforts, offering both financial assistance and emotional support to families in need. As Jack stood at the podium to give his speech, he caught Sarah's eye in the crowd. She gave him a small, encouraging nod. 5 years had passed since the fateful day Jack's lottery win was revealed. Oak Ridge, once a town divided by scandal and whispers, had blossomed into a community united by compassion and second chances. The transformation wasn't just visible in the newly renovated buildings or the thriving public spaces, it was palpable in the spirit of its people. Jack Thompson, once the subject of scorn and judgment, had become a pillar of the community. His lottery winnings, initially a source of secrecy and shame, were now a powerful tool for positive change. The Jack Thompson Foundation, established 3 years ago, had helped countless families struggling with fertility issues and pregnancy loss. It was his way of turning personal tragedy into hope for others. Sarah, too, had found a new purpose in the wake of their shared loss. Her experiences had led her to start a support group for women dealing with pregnancy loss and infertility. What began as small gatherings in the community center had grown into a network spanning several counties. Sarah found healing in helping others navigate the pain she knew all too well. On a warm Saturday morning in June, the town gathered for the grand opening of the Oak Ridge Hope Center. It was a project that, against all odds, had brought Jack and Sarah together again, not as husband and wife, but as partners in healing. The center was a culmination of their individual efforts, offering both financial assistance and emotional support to families in need. As Jack stood at the podium to give his speech, he caught Sarah's eye in the crowd. She gave him a small, encouraging nod, a gesture that spoke volumes about how far they'd come. 5 years ago, Jack began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, I stood before you all and confessed to a terrible mistake. I had won the lottery and, out of fear and misguided good intentions, I kept it a secret from everyone, including my wife. That decision cost me everything I held dear. He paused, taking a deep breath. The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. But today I stand here not to dwell on past mistakes, but to look toward the future. This center represents hope, hope that from our darkest moments we can create light for others. As Jack continued his speech, detailing the services the center would offer, and thanking those who had made it possible, Sarah found herself reflecting on their journey. The pain was still there, a dull ache that might never fully heal. But alongside it was something new, a sense of purpose, pride in what they'd accomplished, and yes, even a flicker of forgiveness. After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled and explored the new center, Jack approached Sarah. They hadn't been alone together in years, always surrounded by committees and volunteers. Now, standing face to face, the weight of their shared history hung between them. Thank you, he said simply, for giving this project a chance, for giving me a chance to make things right. Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. We've both come a long way, Jack. This center, it's something good that came out of all the bad. I'm proud of what we've accomplished here. They walked together to the center's garden, a beautiful space designed for reflection and healing. In the middle stood a young oak tree, its branches reaching toward the sky, "I thought we could plant this together," Jack said, gesturing to the tree. "A symbol of new beginnings." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Together, they knelt by the tree, their hands working in tandem to secure it in the earth. As they worked, memories flooded back, of their first home, of the garden they'd tended together, of dreams shared and lost. "Do you remember," Sarah said softly, "that little apple tree we planted in our first backyard?" Jack nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "It never did bear fruit." "No," Sarah agreed, "but we were so hopeful then." As they stood back to admire their work, Sarah turned to Jack. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said. "About us, about everything that happened, and I've realized something." Jack held his breath, hardly daring to hope. "I can't forget what happened," Sarah continued. "The lies, the loss, it changed me, changed us. But I think I'm ready to forgive, not just you, but myself too. For the anger I held onto for so long." Jack felt tears prick his eyes. "Sarah," she held up a hand, stopping him. "Let me finish. I'm not saying we can go back to how things were. Too much has happened. But maybe we can start over. As friends, at least for now." Jack nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging his throat. After a moment, he managed, "I'd like that, Sarah, more than anything." As they stood there in the new garden, surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor, both Jack and Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over them. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, it felt like they might walk it together. The next few months saw Jack and Sarah cautiously rebuilding their relationship. They met for coffee, worked together at the center, and slowly, tentatively, began to share parts of their lives with each other again. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when old hurts resurfaced, when trust felt fragile and new. But there were also moments of laughter, of shared purpose, of rediscovering the connection that had brought them together in the first place. One year after the opening of the Hope Center, Jack and Sarah stood once again in the garden. The oak tree they had planted together had grown, its branches spreading wide. "It's flourishing," Sarah remarked, running her hand along the trunk. "Like us," Jack said softly. Sarah turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Jack," she began, then paused, gathering her courage. "I've been thinking about us, about the future." Jack's heart raced. "What about the future?" "I think," Sarah took a deep breath, "I think I'm ready to try again, if you are." Jack reached out, taking her hand in his. "Sarah, are you sure? I don't want to rush you, to pressure you in any way." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I'm sure. It won't be easy and we have a lot of work to do. But I love you, Jack. I never stopped, even when I wanted to." Tears filled Jack's eyes as he pulled Sarah close. "I love you too," he whispered. "Always have, always will." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the Hope Center, Jack and Sarah walked hand in hand back to the building. They had lost much, but in the process, they had gained something precious. A second chance, built on a foundation of honesty, forgiveness, and shared purpose. The lottery win that had once threatened to tear them apart had, in the end, become the seed from which a new, stronger love could grow. And as they rejoined their community, both Jack and Sarah knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. In the garden behind them, the young oak tree stood tall, its leaves rustling gently in the evening breeze, a living symbol of new beginnings and the enduring power of love and forgiveness. Just like the tree, Jack and Sarah's relationship had weathered storms, had bent but not broken, and was now growing stronger than ever. As they reached the center's doors, Jack paused, turning to Sarah. "You know," he said with a smile, "I think we should plant an apple tree next. Give it another shot." Sarah laughed, the sound bright and clear in the evening air. "I'd like that," she said, "very much." And with that, they stepped into the Hope Center, ready to write the next chapter of their story, together. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Jack and Sarah's shoes? Your perspective might just help someone facing a similar struggle. And if you want more stories that explore the complexities of love, trust, and redemption, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Remember, it's never too late for a new beginning. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the ashes of our mistakes.